Sweetheart, the service entrance is around the back. We don't let deliveries sit on our Italian leather.
Garrett Voss sneered, and he deliberately kicked Vivienne's worn satchel with the tip of his $4,000 shoe.
And we certainly don't let black women with resold shoes camp out in a platinum-level investment bank. You smell like the bus, and we are very much not the bus.
Vivienne Okonkwo-Hale, wearing a hand-pressed gray suit, didn't flinch. Her voice remained perfectly level.
I have a 9 o'clock appointment.
Garrett barked a harsh, condescending laugh, glancing around the marble lobby to make sure the other associates were watching his performance.
An appointment? With who? The janitorial staff? Because people like you don't get appointments here. You don't belong in this building, and you never will. Now take your little bag and get out before I have security drag you out by your cheap collar.
Vivienne didn't argue. She didn't yell. She just smiled warmly, as if she felt sorry for him. She reached into her bag, and she pulled out a heavy black fountain pen. And slowly, she wrote his name in a small notebook. Garrett had no idea that the calm woman he was publicly humiliating wasn't a cleaner. She was Dr. Vivienne Okonkwo-Hale, the billionaire founder of Ironwood Capital. She personally controlled $4.2 billion of his firm. And over the next 6 hours, she was going to dismantle his entire life. Not one person in that lobby stood up for her. Not the receptionist, not the associates, not the senior partner who slowed his stride, took in the woman with the satchel, and then sped back up, as if she were a puddle he'd nearly stepped in. Not one of them asked her name, but every single one of them was about to learn it, to understand what happened in that lobby, and what happened over the 6 hours that followed. You have to understand the building first. Because the building was the whole story before she ever walked through the door. Thornberry and Vane, 140 years old. A private investment bank that filled 40 floors of a limestone tower in Lower Manhattan, 3 blocks from the stock exchange. In a part of the city where the money is so old, it has forgotten where it came from. The firm managed the fortunes of families whose names are carved on hospital wings and university libraries. It did not advertise. It did not need to. You did not find Thornberry and Vane. Thornberry and Vane decided whether it would find you, and at the top of that firm sat a man who believed he was the firm. His name was Preston Thornberry, Vane III. 63 years old, managing partner, grandson of one of the 2 founders, son of the man who had run the place for 30 years before him. Preston Vane did not build Thornberry, and Vane, he did not earn it. He was handed it, the way a man is handed a coat. And he wore it like he had sewn it himself. He had a saying. He said it to junior partners. He said it at dinners. He said it with a glass of something amber in his hand. To anyone who would nod, you can teach a man numbers. He liked to say, you cannot teach him breeding. I can tell whether someone belongs in this building before they finish saying hello. It's a gift. He thought it was a gift. It was a sickness, and the whole firm had caught it from him. Because that is how it works at the top. The rot starts in the head, and it runs down. Every year, Thornberry and Vane held an event called Diligence Day. It was the firm's oldest tradition. On Diligence Day, the firm's most promising young partners stood in the main conference room. A room with a 40-foot table and portraits of dead white men on every wall. And they presented their biggest deals to a panel of senior partners and a small group of the firm's most important outside investors. The deals were dissected. The numbers were challenged. Reputations were made and broken in a single afternoon. Whoever impressed the room walked out on a path to the very top. It was Preston Vane's kingdom. And Diligence Day was the day he sat on the throne and decided who got to climb. This year, Diligence Day had one guest the firm had been told almost nothing about. The invitation had come from the firm's largest anchor investor, a private fund called Ironwood Capital that had quietly placed $4.2 billion under Thornberry and Vane's management over the past 11 years. Ironwood almost never sent anyone in person. Its people worked through lawyers and letters and wire transfers. But this year, Ironwood had written a single short note to Preston Vane's office. It said, "We are sending a senior representative to observe Diligence Day directly. Please extend every courtesy." Preston Vane had read that note, set it down, and assumed Ironwood was sending some gray-haired man in a tailored suit who would want the good scotch and a window seat. He told his assistant to make sure the conference room had the imported water. He did not give it another thought. He should have given it more. Her name was Dr. Vivienne Okonkwo, 47 years old, born on the south side of Chicago, in a 2-bedroom apartment, over a laundromat, the only child of a man named Samuel Okonkwo, who had come to America from Nigeria with an engineering degree that no American company would honor, and who spent the next 30 years of his life as a janitor. Not just any janitor. For 19 of those years, Samuel Okonkwo cleaned the offices of a financial tower in Lower Manhattan. He waxed the floors that men in suits walked across without seeing him. He emptied the wastebaskets of traders who threw away more money in bad bets before lunch than he made in a year. He was invisible to every one of them, every single day, for 19 years. And every night, Samuel Okonkwo came home to that apartment over the laundromat, and he sat with his daughter at the kitchen table. And he taught her 2 things. The first thing was numbers. Samuel had the mind of an engineer that the world had refused to use. So he poured it into his daughter instead. By the time Vivienne was 9, she could do compound interest in her head. By 12, she understood how a bond worked better than most of the men whose floors her father cleaned. He taught her on the backs of receipts with a fountain pen. The one good thing he owned, a heavy black pen he had carried all the way from Lagos. The pen he used to sign his name on, the only thing that was ever truly his, which was his work. The second thing Samuel taught her was harder, and he only said it once, but she never forgot it. She was 14. She had come home from a wealthy classmate's house, humiliated, because the girl's mother had handed her a coat to hang up. Assuming she was the help, Vivienne cried at the kitchen table, and her father did not tell her it would be okay. He told her the truth. "They will look at your shoes," he said, "and they will decide how much you are worth. They do this without thinking. It is the only math they are bad at." He put the fountain pen in her hand and closed her fingers around it. "So let them be wrong about you. Let them be as wrong as they want to be. For as long as they want to be, because the longer they are wrong, the harder the ground hits when the truth finally drops them onto it. You do not have to argue with a man who has already decided he is right. You only have to outlast him. The numbers do not lie, and neither One day. Will you have to? Samuel Okonkwo died of a heart attack when Vivienne was 19. On the floor of a building, he was not allowed to enter through the front door. She was at MIT on a full scholarship at the time. She flew home, buried her father, and went back to school with his fountain pen in her bag. She has carried it every day since. What happened to Vivienne after that is the part the men in the lobby could never have guessed by looking at her shoes. She graduated MIT. She earned a doctorate in financial mathematics. She went to work for one of the biggest funds in the country. And she made them so much money that within 6 years, she was running a desk. And then, at 36, she walked away and built her own firm with seed money from people who had learned the hard way that betting against Vivienne Okonkwo-Hale was the most expensive mistake a person could make. She called the firm Ironwood Capital. She named it after the hardest wood she could find. A wood so dense it sinks in water. A wood that does not rot, does not bend, and outlasts the people who try to cut it down. 11 years later, Ironwood managed tens of billions of dollars, and 4.2 billion of it sat inside a 140-year-old limestone tower run by a man who had just told his receptionist not to bother learning the names of people with risoled shoes. Vivienne had placed that money with Thornberry and Vane 11 years ago for one simple reason. The numbers were good. The firm's returns were excellent. But over the last 2 years, something in the numbers had started to bother her. Small things. A pattern in which deals got funded and which got buried. A strange consistency in whose careers rose and who stalled, promising analysts. Always with certain names. Always with certain backgrounds. Who appeared in one quarterly report and vanished from the next. The numbers were still good, but the numbers were starting to tell a second story underneath the first one. And Vivienne Okonkwo-Hale had spent her entire life learning to read the story underneath. So, she did not send a lawyer this year. She did not send a letter. She put on a plain gray suit and her father's fountain pen, and she came to see Diligence Day with her own eyes, because she had decided it was time to find out exactly what kind of building she had been trusting with $4.2 billion. She did not come to make a scene. She came to watch. And the building, from the moment she stepped through the door, told her everything she needed to know. The first hour, Vivienne sat in the lobby where the receptionist had pointed, on a hard bench beside the security desk. The seat reserved. She understood immediately. For couriers and contractors and people who did not matter, she set her satchel on her lap. She did not take out her phone. She watched a young white man in a good suit walk up to the same receptionist, and she watched the receptionist's whole body change. The bored slump straightened. The dead smile became a real one. Mr. Ashworth. Of course. They're expecting you upstairs. Let me call the elevator. She watched him breeze through the turnstile that had been a fortress when Vivienne approached it. She watched. 10 minutes later, a delivery of flowers arrive. And she watched the security guard, who had stared right through her, leap up to hold the door for the florist. A young woman, also white, with a warm "here. Let me get that for you, sweetheart." She watched the math her father had warned her about. Running, in real time, in a marble room, right in front of her face. They were not bad people. Exactly. That was the worst part. They were ordinary people running a sorting machine. They did not even know they were operating. The machine had been built so long ago and run so smoothly for so long that the people inside it mistook it for the weather. It just was. The sky was blue. Water was wet. And a black woman with resoled shoes was a delivery that belonged at the back entrance. None of them had to decide it. The building decided it for them, the way it had been deciding it. At the end of the first hour, Vivienne walked back to the desk. "I'd like to confirm my appointment," she said. "The name is Hale." The receptionist, her name was Brittany, according to the little plate, and she could not have been more than 25. Sighed through her nose. She did not check anything. "Like I said, is hon, I don't have anything in the system under a contract interview. If you want, I can take a message." She pulled a pad over, clearly intending to write nothing. The way you offer a child a turn at a game. You have no intention of letting them play. "It's not a contract interview," Vivienne said, still perfectly calm. "It's diligence day. I'm here at the invitation of Ironwood Capital." For just a second. Half a second. Something flickered behind Brittany's eyes. Ironwood. She had heard the name. Everyone in that building had heard the name. It was the biggest single relationship the firm had. But the flicker died the moment it was born. Smothered under 140 years of the building, telling her what was and was not possible. Because the thing about a sorting machine is that it cannot sort the thing it has decided does not exist. Ironwood sends lawyers. The machine said, Ironwood sends old men in good suits. Ironwood does not send this. And so the woman in front of her could not be from Ironwood. It was simpler to believe she was confused. Or lying. Or crazy. "I'll let someone know," Brittany said. "In the voice you use to end a conversation. Please have a seat." Vivienne had a seat. She would have a seat for a very long time. By the second hour, the lobby had a new spectator to her humiliation. His name was Garrett Voss, 31 years old, the youngest senior associate at Thornberry and Vane, and, by his own loud and frequent admission, its future. Garrett had a desk on the 22nd floor and an opinion about everyone who passed through the lobby below it, which he liked to deliver from the mezzanine railing like a man reviewing horses. He had already kicked her satchel once. He had already told her she smelled like the bus. And something about her stillness annoyed him so much that he kept coming back to it. People were supposed to fidget when they were out of place. They were supposed to look small. This woman just sat there, calm as a closed door, writing his name in a little notebook. And Garrett found that the notebook landed in his stomach like a swallowed stone. He did not know why. He covered it with another laugh and walked back up the stairs faster than he had come down. But he kept glancing back at the bench, and the woman, and the notebook. All the way up, he had the sudden, irrational feeling of a man who has just been added to a list he very much did not want to be on. He had no idea how right that feeling was. The third hour, the fourth. They brought coffee to the senior partners upstairs. No one brought Vivienne water. She watched two more favored guests glide through the turnstile. She watched the shift change at the security desk and the new guard receive, in a single glance, from the old one, the full briefing on the woman on the bench. Don't worry about her. She's been told. She'll leave eventually. Not a single word was spoken. The machine, handing off its work. She did not leave. She sat with her satchel and her notebook and her father's pen, and she did the thing he had taught her to do at the kitchen table over receipts 35 years ago. She outlasted them. And while she outlasted them, she watched. And she counted. And the second story underneath the numbers got clearer and clearer. At one point, around the 4th hour, a janitor came through the lobby, an older black man, pushing a cart, emptying the bins. He was as invisible to the lobby as Vivienne was. The receptionist did not see him. The associates did not see him. He moved through them like a ghost. They had agreed not to notice. But Vivienne saw him. She watched him work. And when he passed near her bench, she said, quietly, "Good afternoon, sir." The man stopped. He looked at her. Really looked. The way one invisible person recognizes another across a crowded room. "Afternoon," he said. And then, because she had spoken to him like a person, he added, "Lo, you been waiting a while?" "I have." He glanced toward the desk, toward the turnstile, and something passed across his tired face that was almost a warning and almost an apology. "They do that here," he said. To some people, he didn't have to say which people. He pushed his cart on. But at the edge of the lobby, he paused and looked back at her. And there was something in his eyes. Recognition. Maybe of a stillness he had seen before in a mirror, or in a wife, or in a daughter. And he gave her the smallest nod. The nod that says, "I see you." "Hold on." Vivienne nodded back. And for the first time in 4 hours, her composure flickered. Not into anger, but into grief. Sudden and sharp. Because the man with the cart could have been her father, and her father had died on a floor exactly like this one, in a building exactly like this one, never once allowed through the front. She put her hand on her satchel, on the hard shape of the fountain pen inside it, and she steadied herself. "The longer they are wrong," she heard him say, "the harder the ground hits." She had been patient for 4 hours. She could be patient a little longer. She had been patient, in a sense, her entire life. And the ground, she could feel now, was very close. Around the 5th hour, a man named Roland Mercer came down to the lobby. He did not come to help her either. He came because Garrett Voss had carried word up to the 22nd floor that there was a woman making the lobby look bad. And Mercer, silver-haired, sleek, the firm's right hand, prided himself on handling unpleasant things personally before they became visible. He had no idea who she was. He saw only what the building had trained him to see. He did not sit. He stood over the bench, looked at the satchel and the resoled shoes. And he addressed her the way a man addresses a problem he intends to make disappear. "I understand you've been told there's no appointment for you," he said. "I'm a senior partner here, and I'm going to be direct because I think directness is a kindness. There is nothing for you in this building. Whatever you believe is going to happen here today is not going to happen. I'd ask you to leave now with your dignity rather than have security. Do it for you in front of everyone. Do we understand each other?" Vivienne looked up at Roland Mercer for a long moment. And then she asked him a question that would, in about an hour, replay itself in his mind on a loop he could not stop. "Mr. Mercer, she said. She had read his name off the directory by the elevators an hour ago. The way she read everything. Do you know what the largest single relationship this firm has is by assets under management? Something cold touched the back of Mercer's neck. He covered it with a thin smile. I'm not going to discuss firm business. He started to say, it's a fund called Ironwood Capital. Vivienne said, evenly, $4.2 billion. Roughly a fifth of everything this floor manages. I only ask because I think you should know exactly how much money is sitting on this bench before you call security to remove it. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised her voice in 5 hours. I'm going to give you the same advice you just gave me. Mr. Mercer, because I also think directness is a kindness, go back upstairs and think very carefully about whether you want to be the man who had Ironwood's representative dragged out of the lobby by security. Because that man is going to be looking for a new firm by Friday. And it won't be Ironwood. For one full second, Roland Mercer's certainty wavered. The machine in his head screamed that she was lying. Ironwood sends old men in good suits. This is impossible. She's a con or a crazy person. But underneath the scream was a much older instinct. The survival instinct of a man who has spent 30 years near power. And that instinct said, the cost of being wrong here is everything you have. He stared at her shoes. He stared at her face. And then he did the most dangerous thing a man in his position could do. He let the machine win. He decided she could not possibly be who she said she was. Because the building had spent 140 years making that exact person impossible. Have a good afternoon, he said coldly. And he turned and walked to the elevators. And he told himself, all the way up, that he had handled it. He had not handled it. He had just signed something he could not yet read. Vivienne watched the elevator doors close on him. She opened her notebook. She uncapped her father's pen. And under the name Garrett, she wrote a second name, Roland Mercer. 2 names. Now, she had a feeling she would be adding more. It was nearly 2 in the afternoon, 5 hours after her 9 o'clock appointment, when a junior coordinator finally came down to the lobby, sent down not to help Vivienne, but to get rid of her. Because Garrett Voss had complained to someone that there was a vagrant making the lobby look bad. The coordinator was a nervous young man named Devon, and he had been told to handle it. Ma'am, Devon said, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We can't have people waiting in the lobby without a confirmed appointment. Is there someone I can call you a car? Devon. Is it? Vivienne stood. She did not raise her voice. She had never once, in 5 hours, raised her voice. I'd like you to do one thing for me before you remove me from this building. I'd like you to go upstairs to whoever is running Diligence Day and tell them this exact sentence. Can you do that? Devon swallowed. What sentence? She told him. Tell them. Ironwood's representative has been waiting in the lobby for 5 hours and is now deciding whether Ironwood should remain a client of this firm at all? Devon's face did something complicated. He was 23, and he did not have the authority to evaluate that sentence. But he had been at the firm long enough to know that the word Ironwood was not a word you ignored. He looked at her shoes. He looked at her face. The machine in his head told him she was nobody. But a smaller, newer voice, the voice of a young man who had not yet been fully sorted himself, told him that the cost of being wrong about this was a cost he could not afford to pay. He went upstairs. He delivered the sentence, and 40 floors up, in a conference room with a 40-foot table, Preston Thornberry Vane. The third was about to discover that the math he was proudest of, his gift for knowing who belonged the instant they said hello, was the only math that had ever truly failed him. But before we go upstairs, before the doors of that conference room open, and everything the building believed about itself comes apart, you need to see what was happening on the 22nd floor while Vivienne sat on that bench. Because the rot she had come to find was not a guess. It was happening. In real time. 3 floors above her head. To a young woman who did not have a fountain pen or $4 billion. Who had only her work and who was about to have even that taken from her. Her name was Amara Bell. Amara Bell was 28 years old, an associate on the 22nd floor, and the most talented analyst Thornberry and Vane had hired in a decade, though you would not have known it from the firm's records, because the firm's records had been quietly arranged to say otherwise. Amara had grown up in Baltimore, the daughter of a public school teacher and a postal worker. She had gone to a state university on scholarship, graduated at the top of her finance program, and clawed her way into Thornberry and Vane through the one door the firm couldn't quite close. A blind analytical exam that the firm used as a first-round filter, scored by computer, with the names stripped off. Amara had posted the highest score the exam had recorded in 15 years. The firm had to interview her, and the work she did in her first 2 years was so undeniably, mathematically excellent that even the building's sorting machine couldn't fully bury it. So instead, the machine did something quieter. It let other people stand on her shoulders. The deal Amara had been working for the past 8 months was a complex restructuring of a mid-sized logistics company. A tangled, difficult problem that 3 other associates had looked at and called impossible. Amara had not called it impossible. She had spent 8 months building a financing structure that was, frankly, brilliant. An original approach that unlocked nearly $200 million of value where everyone else had seen a dead end. It was hers. Every model, every assumption, every elegant move was hers. She had built it the way Vivienne's father had taught Vivienne to build things alone, at night, from scratch. Because no one had handed her the standard playbook, and she had to invent her own, and the man scheduled to present it on diligence day. To the senior partners and the firm's most important investors was not Amara Bell. It was Garrett Voss. Here is how it had happened. And it had happened so smoothly that Amara almost couldn't point to the moment it went wrong. 6 weeks before diligence day, Garrett, who outranked her, who had been handed accounts she had built and called them his own before, had been assigned to assist on the logistics deal by Roland Mercer. Mercer was Preston Vane's right hand. A sleek man of 50 with silver hair and a genius for taking credit that flowed uphill and assigning blame that flowed down. Garrett assisting meant Garrett attending the meetings Amara had prepared, asking questions she had already answered in her models, and slowly, deliberately, inserting his name into the email chains until the deal had 2 authors in the record and only one of them had done the work. Then, 2 weeks before diligence day, Mercer had called Amara into his office and explained, with the warm and reasonable tone that powerful men use to deliver unreasonable things, that Garrett would be presenting the deal. It's a seniority question. Amara, you understand. The investors in that room expect a certain profile, a certain polish. You'll be in the room. Your contribution will be noted. Noted. The same word, Brittany, the receptionist, would not write on her pad 5 hours later. In the lobby. To another invisible woman. Noted. In a building where being noted was the careful art of being erased. Amara had gone back to her desk and sat very still. She was not naive. She had felt this coming for weeks. The way you feel weather in a joint. But knowing a thing is coming does not soften it when it lands. She thought about 8 months of work. She thought about the nights. She thought about her mother, the teacher, who had told her to do the work, and the work will speak, and she felt the first crack of doubt in the thing her mother had promised her. Because she had done the work was extraordinary, and the work was about to walk into the most important room in the building, wearing another man's name. She thought about quitting. She thought about saying nothing and surviving, the way you were supposed to. And then she thought about something her grandmother used to say. A thing Amara had never fully understood until that moment. They can take what you made. They cannot take that you made it. Keep the proof. The proof is the one thing that's yours. So Amara did one small thing, one quiet, careful thing. The night before diligence day, she stayed at the office until the cleaning crew came through, until the floor emptied and the lights on 22 dropped to the after-hours dim, and it was just her and the hum of the servers. And she thought about leaving it alone. She really did. She thought about how much easier her life would be if she simply let Garrett stand up tomorrow and take the room, and smiled in the back, and waited for the contribution. Will be noted to maybe, someday, turn into something. That was the safe path. That was the path the building rewarded. Keep your head down. Do brilliant work. Let other people carry it upstairs. And survive. But sitting there in the dim, Amara found she could not make herself do it. Not because she was reckless. She was the opposite of reckless. She had survived this building by being careful, but because of a sentence her grandmother used to say. A sentence Amara hadn't understood until that exact moment. Her grandmother had cleaned houses in Baltimore for 40 years. Houses where the families assumed she couldn't read the books on their shelves. And she used to tell Amara, "They can take what you made. Baby, they can't take that you made it. Keep the proof. The proof is the one thing that's yours." As a child, Amara had thought it was just something old people said. Now, in the after-hours dark of the 22nd floor, watching her own work get readied for another man's mouth, she finally understood it was a survival instruction passed down a generation from a woman who had had everything taken but the truth of her own hands. So she gathered it. Every original file, the time-stamped models, the version histories going back 8 months, the dated working papers, every dead end and every 2 in the morning breakthrough, every edit stamped with the one signature a server cannot forge. She organized 8 months of metadata into a single clean record that proved beyond any argument anyone could ever make. Whose hands had built that deal from nothing. It took her until almost midnight. She did not know what she would do with it. She did not have $4 billion, or a fountain pen, or a name that made receptionists straighten in their chairs. She had no power in that building at all. She only had the truth. Sitting on a drive, waiting for a room that would never let her speak. She saved it. She closed the laptop, and she sat for a moment in the dark, and she let herself feel, just once, the full weight of how unfair it was. 8 months, the best work of her life, and tomorrow she would watch it walk away, smiling. She let herself feel it, and then she put it away, the way you have to. And she went home, and she got 4 hours of sleep. And she came back in the morning in her most careful suit to sit in the chair against the wall and watch it happen. She had no way of knowing that the room was about to change. That 5 floors down, on a hard bench by a security desk, sat a woman who had spent 35 years learning to read exactly the kind of second story Amara's metadata told. And who was, at that very moment, being told to leave the building. The proof was ready. It just needed someone with the power to make the room look at it. That someone was on her way up at 2:15 in the afternoon. The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, and Devin, the coordinator, led Vivienne Okonkwo-Hale out of them, his hands trembling slightly. Because in the 4 minutes it had taken to ride up, he had decided that whatever was about to happen was going to be either the best or the worst thing that had ever happened to his career. And he had no idea which. He had delivered her sentence to Roland Mercer, who ran the floor, and Mercer, who had stood over that same woman in the lobby an hour earlier and told himself he had handled it, felt the cold thing touch the back of his neck again. Harder this time. Ironwood's representative, the woman on the bench, the $4 billion I just threatened to have dragged out by security. He had spent the last hour convincing himself she was a con. Now a junior coordinator was standing in front of him repeating her words. And the words were the same words. And the survival instinct he had ignored once was no longer something he could ignore. Even a 1 in 1,000 chance had been too much. This no longer felt like 1 in 1,000. So he had said, tightly, the silver gone out of his voice. Bring her up. Quietly. I'll handle it. He had said, I'll handle it about her once already. It had not gone the way he promised himself it would. He had a sick feeling it was about to go much worse. Now Vivienne stepped into the corridor outside the great conference room, and the corridor was lined with glass. And through the glass, she could see the room itself. The 40-foot table, the portraits of dead men, the panel of senior partners along one side, and the small cluster of honored guests along the other, and standing at the head of the table, mid-presentation, Klicka in Hand, in front of a screen full of someone else's work, was Garrett Voss. Vivienne stopped at the glass. She watched for a moment, unseen, and she understood, in the space of about 30 seconds, that she was looking at the second story, made visible. There, presenting, was the young man who had called her a bus 5 hours ago. Confident, polished, claiming the room, and there, seated 3 chairs down the guest side. Not at the table, but against the wall. In the seat, for people who did not quite matter, was a young black woman in a careful suit, her hands folded in her lap, her face, a mask of composure stretched over something breaking. Vivienne did not know Amara Bell's name yet, but she knew that face. She had worn that face in a wealthy classmate's foyer at 14. She had seen it on the man with the cart an hour ago. It was the face of someone watching her own work walk away from her. Smiling. In someone else's mouth, Roland Mercer appeared at Vivienne's elbow. His smile already deployed. His voice already smoothing. "Miss Hale, is it? There seems to have been some confusion downstairs. And I do apologize for any inconvenience. But I'm afraid Diligence Day is a closed session. For partners and verified investors only. Mr. Mercer." Vivienne did not look away from the glass. "Open the door. I'm sorry. Open the door. Mr. Mercer. And walk me into that room. And introduce me to it. You can do that now. On your feet. With your dignity intact. Or you can do it in 20 minutes. After I've made a phone call that pulls $4.2 billion out of this firm by the end of the week. And you can explain to Preston Vane why his largest client walked. Because his floor manager left her on a bench for 5 hours and then blocked the door. Those are the 2 doors available to you. I choose quickly. Roland Mercer's smile did not survive that sentence. It came apart at the corners. Slowly. Like wet paper. He looked at her shoes. He looked at her face. And for the first time, the machine in his head returned an answer it had never returned before. An answer it had been built specifically to make impossible. She's telling the truth. The cost of being wrong was no longer 1 in 1,000. It was standing in front of him, perfectly calm, telling him exactly how much it would cost. He opened the door. The conference room did not stop all at once. It stopped in pieces. The way a crowd notices a fire. 1 head. Then 2. Then a ripple. Then the whole room. Garrett Voss. Mid-sentence, at the head of the table. Saw the door open, and saw Roland Mercer step in. And his face brightened. Expecting backup, then he saw who Mercer was escorting. And his sentence died in his throat. The clicker dangled from his hand. The slide behind him, Amara Zizlide. Her $200 million structure, rendered in clean blue lines, glowed on, unattended, while the man presenting it stared at the woman he had called a bus. In the lobby, 5 hours ago, who was now walking into the most important room in his world. Everyone. Roland Mercer said, and his voice had lost all its silver. "I'd like to. This is Miss Hale, from Ironwood." At the far end of the table, Preston Thornberry Vane III set down his pen. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of pink, well-fed face that has never once in its life been told no. He looked at Vivienne over the length of his 40-foot table, and the famous gift went to work behind his eyes. The gift for knowing who belonged. And it told him, with total confidence, that this woman did not. The satchel, the suit, the shoes. Ironwood sends old men in good suits. The machine said, "This is a mistake. This is someone's assistant. This is, perhaps, a security problem." And Preston Vane, who had never learned that his gift was a sickness, made the last and largest mistake of his career. He trusted it out loud. "Roland," he said, with a small, indulgent smile, not bothering to lower his voice. "I think someone in your shop has been taken for a ride. Ironwood does not send." He gestured, vaguely, at all of her. This. Get her a car. We're in the middle of something. He picked his pen back up. He actually picked the pen back up, and he said, "To the room," with the easy cruelty of a man who has never once paid for it. Honestly, security really will let anyone up these days. She probably came in off the bus. The bus. He could not have known he was the second man in that building to say it to her that day. But Vivienne knew, and something in her went very still and very bright. Not anger. Exactly. Clarity. The ground, she understood, had arrived. She walked the length of the 40-foot table. Slowly. Unhurried. 40 floors up. In a 140-year-old room. Past the portraits of every dead man who built the machine. She walked to the head of the table, where Preston Vane sat, and she set her worn leather satchel down on the gleaming wood in front of him. The panel of partners watched. The guests watched. Garrett Voss watched, gray-faced. And against the wall, Amara Bell watched, her folded hands gone white at the knuckles, not understanding yet what she was seeing. Only that she was seeing something she had never seen in this building before. A woman who looked like her, who moved through this room like she owned it. Vivienne opened the satchel. She did not pull out a weapon, or a phone, or a lawyer's letter. She pulled out a single heavy black fountain pen, and she set it on the table beside her satchel. Point down, standing it upright against the wood, like a small flag planted on conquered ground. Then she looked at Preston Thornberry Vane, the third, and she spoke for the first time since entering the room, in a voice that carried to every corner of it, without ever once being raised. "My name," she said, "is Dr. Vivienne Okonkwo-Halle. I am the founder and managing partner of Ironwood Capital. 11 years ago, I placed $4.2 billion under the management of this firm. That makes me Mr. Vane, by a considerable margin, the largest single source of the money you have spent your afternoon deciding who does and does not deserve to be in this room." She let that sit. The silence in the conference room was total. "You said I came in off the bus. You're the second man in this building to say that to me today. I wrote the first one's name down. I'm going to write yours down too." And she picked up the fountain pen, and she opened her notebook, and in front of 40 floors of inherited power, she wrote down the name of Preston Thornberry Vane III. For a moment, no one in the room breathed. Preston Vane's pink face went through several colors in quick succession, settling, finally, on a gray that matched Garrett's. He stood, too fast, his chair rolling back and hitting the wall. And the easy cruelty was gone. Replaced by the scramble of a man who has just felt the floor, he was standing on turn into open air. "Dr. Hale," he began, and the doctor came out strangled, because he had never in his life had to find that word for someone he had just dismissed. Of course, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. You must understand. The lobby staff, they couldn't have known. Please, sit. Let me get you something. I don't want a seat. Mr. Vane, Vivienne said, "I had a seat. I had your seat for couriers. By your security desk. For 5 hours. She capped the fountain pen. "I came here today because I have been bothered. For 2 years. By something in your numbers. Your returns are good. But underneath the returns, your firm has been telling a second story, and I came to find out whether I was imagining it. She turned slowly and looked down the room, at the panel, at the guests, at Garrett, frozen at the head of the table, and finally at the screen, still glowing behind him with its clean blue lines. I was not imagining it. You showed it to me yourself. In the lobby, in the elevator, and in this room, before I had said a word. But I'd like to see the rest of it now. She walked to the screen. She studied Garrett's slide, Amara's slide, the way she had once studied bonds at a kitchen table, at the age of 12, the financing structure, the unlocked value, the elegance of it, and Vivienne Okonkwohale, who had built her entire fortune on her ability to read the architecture of a deal, saw immediately that the work on that screen was extraordinary, original, the kind of thing that does not come from a man like Garrett Voss, whom she had watched perform in the lobby for 5 hours and correctly assessed as a person who claimed things rather than built them. She turned to Garrett. This structure, the cross-collateralization here, and this tranche release mechanism, walk me through how you arrived at it. Not what it does. How you found it. Take me through the dead ends. Every good structure has 3 or 4 dead ends behind it, before the right path. Show me yours. Garrett opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because there were no dead ends, he could show her. Because he had not walked the path. Because the path was not his. He looked at Roland Mercer. Mercer looked at the table, and the silence stretched, and stretched. And in that stretching silence, the entire room began. Slowly, to understand what it was watching. The team developed it together. Garrett tried. The team? Vivienne repeated. The same way Brittany had said Han. The same way Mercer had said noted. She let the word hang. And then she did the thing none of them expected. She turned away from Garrett entirely. And she looked at the young woman against the wall. The one in the careful suit, with the folded, white-knuckled hands. The one who had been seated in the chair for people who did not matter. The one whose face, Vivienne, had recognized through the glass. What's your name? Vivienne asked her. Gently. The same question she had asked Garrett in the lobby. But this time, it was not a trap. This time, it was a door. Amara Bell's voice. When it came, was steady. Though it cost her everything to make it so. Amara Bell. I'm an associate on 22. Miss Bell. Miss Bell. Vivienne gestured at the screen. At the blue lines. Whose work is this? The room held its breath. And Amara, who had spent the last 6 weeks being erased, so quietly she could barely point to the moment, who had prepared a clean record of time-stamped proof the night before because her grandmother had told her, keep the proof. The proof is the one thing that's yours. Who had walked into this room, expecting to watch her 8 months of work walk out in another man's mouth and say nothing. And survive. The way you were supposed to. Amara looked at the woman with the fountain pen. She looked at a black woman standing at the head of a 40-foot table in a 140-year-old room, asking her, in front of everyone, the one question no one in this building had ever asked her, and she decided not to survive quietly. She decided to tell the truth. It's mine, Amara said. The words landed in the room like a stone in still water. I built it, she said. And now Her voice gained something. A current under the calm. The same current that had run under Vivien's stillness on the bench for 5 hours. 8 months. From scratch. 3 other associates called the logistics restructuring impossible. The cross-collateralization, the tranche mechanism, the value unlock. All of it is mine. Mr. Voss was assigned to assist 6 weeks ago. He attended the meetings I prepared. He asked questions my models had already answered. 2 weeks ago, I was told he would present it instead of me. 4. She did not flinch. Seniority reasons. And that my contribution would be noted. Noted. Vivienne said softly. Noted. Amara confirmed. Preston Vane found his voice and made his second to last mistake. This is an internal personnel matter, he said, trying to seize back some scrap of the room, and it's frankly inappropriate to air it in front of guests. Can you prove it? Vivienne asked Amara, cutting straight across Preston Vane as if he were furniture. What you just said. Can you prove the work is yours? Yes, Amara said. How? Every model has a version history. Every file has metadata. Who created it? When? Every edit. Time-stamped. Going back 8 months. The originals are dated. Mr. Voss's name doesn't appear in any of them until 6 weeks ago. And when it does appear, it appears on copies, not originals. The proof is on the firm's own servers. It's been there the whole time. She paused, and then she added, with the quiet steel of someone who has just realized the ground has finally arrived for her too. I organized all of it into a single record last night. I have it. I can put it on that screen in 90 seconds. Vivienne Okonkwohela smiled. Really smiled. For the first time since she had walked into the building. Because she had come looking for the second story underneath the numbers, and she had found it standing against the wall in a careful suit, holding the proof in her own 2 hands. The same way Vivienne's father had held his fountain pen. The same way Vivienne had held her composure for 5 hours on a bench. The proof had been there the whole time. It had only ever needed a room willing to look at it. Put it up, Vivienne said. Let's let the whole room look. It took 80 seconds. Amara Bell walked to the laptop, past Garrett, who did not move, who could not move, and she connected her drive. And Garrett's slide vanished, replaced by something far more powerful than a financing structure. It was the truth, rendered in metadata. Version 1 of the model, created 8 months ago. Amara Bell. Version 47, created 8 months ago. Amara Bell. Every night, every weekend, every dead end, and every breakthrough. Time-stamped, dated, signed in, the only signature a server cannot forge, the record of who actually did the work. And there, 6 weeks ago, the sudden appearance of a second name on copies of files that already existed. Garrett Voss. Not building, copying. Standing on shoulders, the room read it in silence. The panel of senior partners, men who had spent their careers inside the machine, who had run it and benefited from it and never once had to see it operate this nakedly. Read, 8 months of one woman's labor and 6 weeks of one man's theft, laid out in numbers that could not lie, and one by one, their faces changed. Not all of them, but enough of them, Because the thing about proof is that once it is on the screen, in front of everyone, the machine cannot unshow it. The sorting could survive a black woman with resoled shoes. It could not survive its own metadata. And then something happened that Preston Vane had not planned for and could not stop. One of his own partners spoke. Her name was Eleanor Cho, the only woman on the senior panel. 60 years old, 22 years at the firm. A person who had spent 2 decades watching the machine work and surviving it by staying very quiet. Because that was the price of a seat at the 40-foot table. And she had paid it for 22 years. She stood up slowly. She looked at the metadata on the screen. She looked at Amara Bell. And then she looked at Preston Vane and said the thing she had swallowed for 22 years. It's not just her. Preston. Her voice was quiet, but it carried, "We both know it's not just her. I've watched this happen. This exact thing. This noted. At least a dozen times in this building. Different names. Always the same kind of name." I told myself it wasn't my place to say anything. I told myself I'd lose my seat. She gestured at the screen. At 8 months of stolen work, glowing in clean blue lines. I'm tired of telling myself that. Miss Bell built that. Everyone on this panel can read a version history. We all know she built it. The only question left is whether we're going to keep pretending we can't. She sat back down, and the silence that followed her was different from every silence that had come before it in that room. Because it was the silence of a machine that had just had one of its own gears refuse to turn, Garrett Voss made a small, strangled sound. He was still standing at the head of the table, beside the screen that now testified against him, and he had stopped being a future and started being a record. He looked, for the first time in his life, like a man who had been handed everything and was about to discover what it cost. Vivienne let them read for a long moment. Then she turned to Preston Vane. And now her voice did change. Not louder, but harder. The iron of the wood she had named her firm after. Here is what I found. Mr. Vane, in the 2 years your numbers have been bothering me, I found a firm with excellent returns and a rotten foundation. I found a sorting machine. I watched it run on me for 5 hours in your lobby. Your staff couldn't see $4 billion because it came wearing the wrong shoes? And I just watched it run on her. She nodded at Amara. For 8 months. In your own files. This is not one bad receptionist. This is not one ambitious associate. This is a system. It decides, before anyone says hello, who gets to build and who gets to be noted, who comes through the front and who belongs at the back. And it has been so good at it, for so long, that the people running it think it's the weather. She picked up her father's fountain pen from the table. My father cleaned floors in a building exactly like this one for 19 years. He died on one of those floors. He was never once allowed through the front door. He taught me that men like you would look at my shoes and decide what I was worth, and that the only math you were ever bad at was that one. I have spent 35 years proving him right. She held up the pen. This was his. I sign every deal Ironwood does with it. And I am holding it right now, because I want you to understand that the decision I am about to make, I am making in his name. Preston Thornberry Vane, the third. 63 years old. Third of his name. Handed everything, having earned nothing. Stood at the head of his 40-foot table in his 140-year-old room and made the last mistake available to him, which was to beg Dr. Hale, please, whatever has happened here, it can be corrected. Miss Bell will be credited. Fully. Of course. And promoted. And Voss will face consequences. I assure you. Severe ones. But Ironwood's relationship with this firm goes back 11 years. $4 billion. You can't possibly throw that away over a misunderstanding in the lobby. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Mr. Vane. Vivienne said. That's the whole problem. A misunderstanding is an accident. This was a machine, working exactly as designed, and I am not throwing $4 billion away. I'm taking it somewhere that won't leave the next Amara Bell on a bench. She capped the pen. What happened over the next 72 hours moved faster than anything Thornberry and Vane had experienced in 140 years. Vivienne did not. In the end, pull all $4 billion in a single afternoon. She was too good an investor for theater that would have cost her own clients money. She did something far more precise and far more devastating. Before she left the building that day, she sat down with the partners on the panel whose faces had changed while they read the metadata. Eleanor Cho among them. The woman who had finally refused to stay quiet. And she made them an offer. Ironwood would keep its money at the firm. En condition. The conditions were not negotiable. And the first of them was that the people who had had the courage to break ranks would be the ones to lead what came next. Eleanor Cho, who had swallowed the truth for 22 years and then stood up and spoke it in the one room where it mattered most, would chair the committee that rebuilt the firm. Vivienne had a rule about that. Learned over 35 years. You do not hand a broken institution to the people who broke it. You hand it to the ones who were brave enough to say it was broken, while it still cost them something to say so. Preston Thornberry Vane, the third, would step down as managing partner, effective immediately. Roland Mercer, who had engineered the theft of Amara's work and left Vivienne in the lobby, would be removed from the firm entirely. His 30 years of uphill credit-taking finally catching up to him in a single afternoon. Garrett Voss, who had called a $4 billion investor a bus, and a brilliant colleague a stepping stone, would be terminated, his offer of partnership withdrawn, his name attached, permanently, to the record of what he had tried to take. And Brittany at the front desk, and the security guards, and the whole apparatus of the lobby would be retrained from the ground up, not because they were uniquely cruel, but because they had been faithfully running a cruel machine, and the machine was being shut down. But the largest condition, the one Vivienne cared about most, the one she made the new leadership write into the firm's bylaws in ink, was not a punishment at all. It was a structure, because Vivienne Okonkwo Hale had not built a $4 billion firm by punishing individuals. She had built it by understanding that you do not fix a rotten system by firing the people the system produced. You fix it by changing what the system rewards. She called it the janitor's standard. The janitor's standard was simple, and it was ruthless, and it changed everything. It had 3 rules, and Vivienne named it after her father, because the whole point of it was to build the door he was never allowed to walk through. The first rule: every analytical contribution at the firm would be tracked by origin automatically in the metadata, and credit would follow the work, not the seniority, not the polish, not the name, Whoever built it presented it. If you wanted to stand at the head of the 40-foot table, you had to have walked the dead ends yourself. The thing that had saved Amara, the time-stamped record of who actually did the work, became the law of the building. You could no longer be noted. You could only be credited, because the system now made erasure technically impossible. The second rule: the firm's hiring and advancement would run at every stage that could possibly bear it. Through blind evaluation, names stripped, backgrounds hidden, the work judged before the worker was seen. It was the exact door Amara had come through in the first place. The one blind exam the machine couldn't rig now widened from a crack into the firm's front entrance. Preston Vane's gift for knowing who belonged before they said hello was not just discouraged, it was designed out of the building. Because the new system did not let anyone see the shoes until after they had seen the work. And the third rule, the one Vivienne wrote last, and signed with her father's fountain pen, was about the lobby. There would be no more bench for couriers, no more sorting at the door. Every person who entered Thornberry and Vane, from the largest investor to the youngest delivery driver, would be received by name the moment they gave it. Because the rot had not started in the conference room. It had started at the front desk, in the small automatics 140-year-old decision about who was worth a name and who was worth a hon. And you cannot reform the top of a building while the bottom of it is still teaching everyone who walks in exactly how little they are worth. Within a year, the janitor's standard had spread beyond Thornberry and Vane. Vivienne made it a condition of every relationship Ironwood held, and Ironwood held a great many. Firms across the industry adopted it, at first because they wanted Ironwood's money, and then, slowly, because the people inside those firms, the Amara Bells, who had been getting noted for 140 years, began to demand it. It did not fix everything. Vivienne never claimed it did, but it built doors where there had been walls. And it took the one math the powerful were worst at, and made it the one math the system could no longer get wrong. 2 weeks after Diligence Day, the conference room on the 40th floor was empty. Amara Bell came up to it alone. In the evening, after the floor had cleared, she was not an associate anymore. She had been promoted. Really promoted. Not noted. And the logistics restructuring she had built over 8 months had closed under her name, unlocking the $200 million exactly as she had designed. She had come up to the empty room for a reason she couldn't fully explain. The way you return to a place where something in your life turned, the 40-foot table was still there. The portraits of the dead men were still on the walls. Vivienne had left those up. On purpose. Leave them, she had said. Let them watch what the building becomes. Amara was not alone for long. The door opened, and Vivienne Okonkwohala came in. She had been in the building all afternoon, finalizing the bylaws, and she found the young woman standing at the head of the table where, 2 weeks ago, her work had glowed on the screen in another man's presentation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There were no cameras now, no panel, no guests, no machine, just 2 women and a 40-foot table and the portraits of every man who had built the thing they had just broken. I never thanked you, Amara said finally. Don't? Vivienne said. You didn't need me. You had the proof. You'd already decided to put it on the screen the night before. You organized it before you ever knew I existed. I didn't save you. Miss Bell, I just made the room look like you did the rest. She crossed to the table and ran her hand along the gleaming wood. Can I tell you the truth? When I walked in here, I wasn't sure I'd find anything. 2 years of bad feelings about some numbers. I thought maybe I was imagining it. The way they make you think you're imagining it? She looked up, and then I saw your face through that glass. In the chair against the wall, and I knew I wasn't imagining anything. I'd seen that face my whole life. I'd worn it. Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question she had come up to the empty room to ask. The pen, she said. On the table that day, you stood it up like a flag. Why a pen? Vivienne took the heavy black fountain pen out of her pocket. She turned it over in her fingers. It was my father's, she said. He came here from Nigeria with an engineering degree this country wouldn't honor. And he spent 30 years as a janitor. 19 of them in a building, 3 blocks from this one. He cleaned the floors of men who never once saw him. She set the pen on the table, point down, standing it up exactly as she had 2 weeks before. This pen was the one thing he owned that was truly his. He signed his name with it. His name on his work was the only thing in his life that no one could take or claim or note into nothing. He taught me that they'd look at my shoes and decide what I was worth, and that the only way to win was to outlast them, because the longer they were wrong, the harder the ground would hit when the truth finally dropped them onto it. She looked at the portraits. I sat on that bench downstairs for 5 hours. Miss Bell, and the whole time, I could hear him. Let them be wrong about you. Let them be as wrong as they want to be. The numbers don't lie. She picked the pen back up and pressed it, gently, into Amara's hand. The way Samuel Okonkwo had once pressed it into hers at a kitchen table over receipts. Keep the proof. Vivienne said, always keep the proof. It's the one thing that's yours. A month later, Vivienne Okonkwo Hale was riding home through Manhattan in the back of a car, past the limestone tower. When her phone rang, it was Amara. It's done. Amara said, the bylaws, the janitor's standard. 3 other firms signed on this week. Vivienne watched the tower slide past the window. The building her father had been allowed to clean, but never to enter. The building that had left her on a bench. The building that now, finally, received every person who walked in by name. How does it feel? Amara asked. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. She thought about a fountain pen, and a kitchen table, and a man who died on a floor he wasn't allowed to walk into through the front. She thought about 5 hours on a hard bench. She thought about the metadata glowing on a screen. 8 months of a young woman's work that the machine had tried and failed to erase. It feels, she said finally, like the door was always there. They just never let us see that we were the ones holding the key. Here's the thing about that story. Vivienne Okonkwo Hale did not raise her voice. Not once. Not in 5 hours on the bench. Not in the elevator. Not at the head of a 40-foot table, in front of 40 floors of inherited power. She did not have to. She just outlasted them. The way her father taught her. And she let the proof do what proof does. And Amara Bell, 28 years old. No fountain pen. No. $4 billion. No name that straightened anybody's spine. She didn't beg either. She kept the proof. She decided. When the door finally opened, not to survive quietly. She told the truth. And she put it on the screen. And she let the whole room look tech. That's the thing they never understand about the people they leave on the bench. You can decide someone's worth by their shoes. You can leave them waiting for 5 hours. Or erase them over 8 months. Or call them a bust to their face, in front of everyone you're trying to impress. But the work doesn't lie. The metadata doesn't lie. The numbers don't lie. And the longer you're wrong about someone, the harder the ground hits when the truth finally drops you onto it. They looked at her shoes and decided what she was worth. It was the only math they were ever bad at. If this story reminded you of someone the world looked at and underestimated, someone who's been noted into nothing while watching their work walk out in another person's mouth, share it with them. Let them know the door was always there. And if you've ever been left on a bench, in a lobby, in a building that decided who you were before you said a word, tell us in the comments. What happened? Did the ground ever drop them? Because Vivienne Okonkwo-Hale and Amara Bell are not the last. They are just the ones who kept the proof. Subscribe. There are more of them.